Good evening. From our CBS newsroom, I'm Walter Cronkite. This news broadcast is a decade review of the events that took place in the early 1960s to early 1970s. In the beginning of the decade, the Cuban Missile Crisis was on October 16, 1962. The USSR was building missile bases in Cuba. Kennedy ordered Cuban blockade, but then he lifts the blockade when Russia backs down. Then, on August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave this speech to an estimated 250,000 people. 60,000 of those people were white. There were people from all over the country. Very few arrests were reported. This was a very significant speech in civil rights history. On November 22, 1963, the horrific death of President Kennedy happened. He was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald. This was a tragic death and was one of the most controversial deaths out there. Who did it? Why? And will we ever know what truly happened? From the route changing to the mysterious cleanups and missing evidence, what happened to President John F. Kennedy will remain the most tragic event in 1963. Then, on April 3, 1964, another civil rights speech was made. This one was made by an outgoing, do-whatever-it-takes kind of person. Malcolm X was for violence and making things happen no matter what. That day, the speech, Ballot or the Bullet, was made. He tried to pursue African Americans to do whatever they had to do to make a change. A huge riot broke out in Los Angeles and Watts for 6 days. On August 11th through the 16th in 1965, African Americans started to riot. The devastating totals in the end were 34 people dead, over 1,000 people injured, and almost 4,000 people were arrested throughout the 6 days. On March 16, 1968, American soldiers, included the Charlie Company of the American Division 11th Infantry, led by Lieutenant Calley during Vietnam, destroyed a village called My Lai. It is said that around 500 women and children were killed, none of which were Viet Cong, in the village. This was kept a secret for almost a year from us, but today we know what really happened. Another tragic event took place on April 4, 1968. This amazing civil rights activist was a strong, powerful leader. Martin Luther King Jr. died on April 4th in Memphis, Tennessee. He was killed by James Earl Ray. Ray was convicted March 10, 1969. On July 23, 1967, there was some racial violence in Detroit. 7,000 National Guardsmen aided police after nights of rioting. There was also similar rioting and outbreaks in New York City, Spanish Harlem, Rochester, New York, Birmingham, Alabama, and New Britain. In later news, on January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. The peace agreement was uncertain if they would actually work or if the peace would stay and continue to stay. The mood of this whole thing was very gloomy, and as a political nation, we were ashamed. Last but not least, on March 29th of 1973, the last troops were withdrawn from Vietnam. What a great relief for our country. America was truly satisfied of this event that we have finally pulled out of this unwinnable war. And that's the way it is on this recap of the early 1960s to the early 1970s, Wednesday, December 17, 2014.